Welcome to episode 96 of our Sperduti Fitness podcast, where we take a dive into topics that matter in the health and fitness field. I'm your host, Brian. I'm here with my co-host, Beth. In today's episode, we have the privilege of sitting down with Val Mackiewicz, a ADHD and executive coach. With her expertise, Val has helped countless individuals navigate the complexities of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and develop strategies for success. We're going to explore the nuances of ADHD, its impact on children, men and women, and the various approaches to managing and thriving with this condition. But before we jump into today's podcast, Coach Beth's going to take us through a few announcements.
Welcome back, everyone, to the podcast. I, of course, am talking about the best, the one and only Sperduti Fitness 12-week transformation challenge. The next challenge is going to be starting on Monday, March 25th. The enrollment is open, and of course, that grand prize winner is going to walk away with $1,000. This is the first transformation program to combine fitness and nutrition education. Head on over to the Sperduti Fitness Facebook page and click on that 12-week transformation link, or you can download the free Sperduti Fitness app, and you can download that there. Or you can visit our website, www.sperdutifitness.com, to get yourself enrolled. Grab a friend, grab your mom, grab your sister, grab your coworker, get yourself enrolled, and let's start your transformation. Let's get into tonight's topic.
Awesome. Val, thank you so much for joining us today on the Sperduti Fitness podcast. We want to jump right into it because we've had a lot of clients, and Beth and myself are super interested. Can you share with us a bit about your journey and what led you to specialize in ADHD coaching?
Yes, I'd love to share. And thank you so much for having me. I was just informed that you guys are almost up to 100 podcast episodes. That is no small thing. So I feel really lucky and just honored to be here with you guys, and for all the people listening that you guys have impacted and support in their health journeys. This is such a privilege. So thank you so much for having me, really.
Thank you.
So the how we got here story, that's my favorite thing to know about everybody, by the way. So my how we got here story pertaining to ADHD and ADHD coaching is that I am a person with ADHD, absolutely have had it my whole life, and didn't have a diagnosis until in my 20s. So we call that late diagnosis. And so I was an undiagnosed ADHDer moving through the world, and not well, I would say. And not to pick on myself, but growing up, I just had my fair share of struggles that weren't really pinpointed by any medical professionals, by any psychiatric professionals. I was a person who sort of fell through the cracks. I had a pretty high intelligence, and so I would do just well enough that people just thought, well, maybe it must just be like some depression or something. It must just be some anxiety or something. And so I just got sort of tossed in these really familiar buckets that people knew what to do with, instead of the ADHD one that was what was actually going on. But that was a different time. We're in some different times now. ADHD is much more part of the conversation. But fast forward a little bit more to when we experienced total shutdown, being inside, putting ourselves on screens. And I found myself having to completely rework all of the habits, routines, and systems that I had to work so hard to build. And I had to rework those overnight. And I know everyone kind of had to do that. But for those of us with ADHD, instead of that being just like an earthquake, it was sort of like an apocalypse, to give a little bit of a difference. I noticed myself having such a massive struggle that I decided it was time to stop ignoring my ADHD, because that was my intervention strategy. Don't do that. The worst thing you could possibly do for any type of condition or experience that you're having perpetually is to pretend that it doesn't exist. So don't do what I did and delay getting help, but I went searching for the help that I needed and had actually a really hard time finding it. ADHD support is a pretty interesting Google search a few years ago. Now there's a lot more, but I couldn't really find what I was looking for. And so at a certain point, when you struggle in life, you have to sometimes become the help that you need. And I don't know how many people can relate to that, but sometimes it just gets that hard and you can't wait around. No one's coming for you. At some point, we just accept that. And it's time to just step into whatever it is that we're afraid of. So I had to sort of become the help that I needed. And I found an ADHD coaching program, and I was coached. I experienced coaching through that program by being coached. So I finally got to get the help I needed while I was becoming the help that other people needed. And that's how I got here. I've been practicing, I think it's going into like about 3 years now. But I've always been in the mentorship space, the leadership space, and just facilitating, helping people just in my whole life of doing different things. So ADHD coaching is where I land. And that also falls under executive function coaching. It also falls under life coaching. And I specifically love working with anyone who identifies as having a busy brain, or is a leader, or is just a high achiever, just anybody wanting good things for their life is pretty much who I can help and work with. And that's sort of the how we got here story.
So ADHD is something that is typically often misunderstood. Can you give us a brief overview of what ADHD is and how it can manifest in certain people?
Absolutely. I feel like if I asked you guys or any of the people listening, when you think of ADHD, you see blank. And many people would probably have a lot of the same responses. It's typically it's that kid in school who never sat still. It's the little boy who was super disruptive and drove, right? Right? It's this or it's that, because that was what was being recognized as ADHD in sort of the beginnings. But now that we've had more information and science has helped us a whole lot with that, and now exploring and finally testing women and girls and their ADHD, because it's also prevalent in women, it's just a lot of people have this picture of ADHD, and if something doesn't fit the picture, then that must not be it. Or if we don't fit the picture, we don't fully understand it. And so one of the tricky things that I do want to say about the ADHD label itself is that labels are not something that we should be trying to have for other people. That's a really important thing that I want to say. I'm not interested in having a conversation in this space or any space where I'm giving people some sort of label as ammunition, or to put people in a box, or to point fingers at anyone other than themselves. And so ADHD as a label is a term that they came up with to describe certain behaviors that we see. And I think it's fair and safe, if that label serves you and helps you, and it gives you helpful language to identify and explain an experience that you're having, then that's really helpful. And it's a helpful label. Where it's not helpful is where we start saying who we think has it or doesn't have it. So I just like to disclaimer that a little bit in spaces where we can have honest conversation about that around labels and diagnoses and pathology, right? So ADHD does include ADD. I want to clarify that. They just changed it in the diagnostic manual. So now it's all one thing. It's ADHD, and it's categorized into 3 different like sort of presentation types, you would say. And one of them is hyperactive, and that's the one that we can see the most, right? That's what we identify. Oh yeah, that's ADHD, the bouncy kid, right? Or the one who, the catty girl who won't shut up and can't, all of these like really judgmental terms, right? So the hyperactive, and then there's the inattentive. And this one's the tricky one. This is where the hyperactivity is still there, but it's more internalized. So it might be hyperactive thinking, hyper processing. It might even present physically with like a hyperkinesis, where there's a rigidity in the body, and it presents totally differently from like the outward hyperactive. So that's the inattentive. It presents a little bit more daydreamy and kind of on the quieter side. And then there's combined type. So try to identify those individuals, right? It's a lot trickier. So ADHD, who has it, who doesn't, what is it, what isn't it? Truly only the the people who understand ADHD are the people who know, and the people who don't understand ADHD and then try to, based on a TikTok reel or something really anecdotal and quirky, they're kind of missing the mark. So I really encourage people to just stick with like the basic facts of what it definitely is. And speaking to that, I also want to point out another thing that it isn't, which blows people's mind. ADHD is not a behavior disorder. That's not the category it falls in. It's not a mood disorder. It's not like anxiety, depression, ADHD. It's not on that list. It's a neurodevelopmental delay. It's a neurodevelopmental disorder. That has to do with the development of the brain, including the nervous system. That process has a point of delay and a sort of lagging in development from birth, from the youngest possible age. And so the structures of the brain, and therefore the functions of those parts of the brain that are delayed in formation in any way, are going to affect cognitive function. Not talking about intelligence. Intelligence is different. ADHDers are they have some of the most highest intelligence that could ever test out. It kind of blows people's minds. So grades don't indicate ADHD or not. That goes true, and it's true on both ends of it as well. That just because someone has incredible grades growing up in school doesn't mean they don't have ADHD, and just because someone isn't having great grades in school doesn't mean they have or don't have ADHD. So intelligence is no bearing, but that neurodevelopmental delay, it can typically present about a 3 to 5 year delay, and people ask, well, in what? Mostly it's going to show up in executive functions. Before I dive into that, I want to pause.
I know.
Love it.
You just unleashed about 12
it.
podcasts out of that.
I know. I
went
absolutely
deep.
love this.
Like that was so fantastic of a description for people to see, to hear, and to really put that into perspective, what it is and what it isn't.
Yes.
Now, typically, is there a difference between adults and children when they're showing the presentation of this ADHD?
Yeah, so the difference is sort of the same, where it can show up and swing 2 different ways. So when we're children, we have so much less responsibility and things that we have to be keeping track of and showing up for and whatever. So this is why late diagnosis can be pretty common, where people go a lot of their life and they don't have their diagnosis until later, because those responsibilities aren't stacking up as much until further along. And so the executive function demands sometimes won't be until later in life. And so that's where it's going to sort of rear itself, right? Also, because dopamine is it's like the key player. This is the Josh Allen, this is the quarterback of ADHD, is dopamine. So anything that affects our dopamine is going to impact when we have ADHD. And dopamine is also really connected to our hormones. And so particularly in women and girls, that ADHD may be a little trickier to spot until those hormone changes happen. And that's when our dopamine processes sort of become a lot more like noticeable, like, oh, okay, wow, this is really affecting things. That being said, in childhood, sometimes it can be even more difficult, because those self-regulation skills that are developmental, by the way, and I'll talk about executive function, I think, after this, so people can understand. But those executive function skills and self-regulation skills, they're not developed yet. Like, your brain's not done yet till you're 30, and then it's still not done yet growing, like developing, growing. It's still not done yet even then, because then we have neuroplasticity, which is the process of being able to like create new pathways, new stuff going on, and head us in the directions we haven't been able to head before. I'm really fascinated in neuroplasticity. That's like the basis of my coaching. But all that to say, like the difference between childhood and adulthood, anything that you can say for childhood could also be difficult in adulthood for different reasons. The things that are difficult in adulthood could be different in childhood for different reasons. And this is why ADHD is such a paradox. This is why it's been difficult to really fully understand the pieces of it. This is why it's been underdiagnosed, not overdiagnosed. We can talk about that separately too. But it's messy. It's real messy. So it's tricky to sort of intermingle all those things between childhood and adulthood. But the presentation is going to show up mostly in executive dysfunction, executive function, and self-regulation. So I can dive into that if you guys want to. But did you have any specific things about what I just shared that you wanted me to clarify? Sometimes I get sciencey and I need to be like, Val, take off your...
Science.
I love it. Can you actually talk a bit about or define executive function and self-regulation skills?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. If I say a word and you're like, what's that word? Like, just pause. Like, please, I have ADHD. I'm a professional interrupter. Please interrupt me if you need to clarify. Okay. I will just nerd out if I'm left to my own devices. Okay. So executive function, I want you to think of, this is, if you use this as like the model of the brain, like this is your brain stem, here's your brain. In the development of the brain, this front part, well, let me go like that. No, I'll go like this. This front part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, this whole front part, that's the last part to develop. And that continues to develop up to like 28, 29, 30 years old. Bet you didn't know. all these whippersnappers in their 20s being cray-cray, their brain's not done yet. Go easy on it, right? So that front part of the brain in development happens last, and that is where executive function is sort of born and resides. Okay, that is why it's already sort of coming in last. And then when you add anywhere from a 2 to 5 year delay on top of that, that's where you're going to see a lot of impacting function. So executive functions are categorized all different ways depending on who you ask. If it's a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a speech pathologist or someone who works with someone with learning disorder, you're going to hear it all different ways. This is how I like to understand it because it's based on the development timeline. So when we're born, one of the first things that we learn is inhibition and self-restraint. Okay. That's like one of the very first things to develop like in year one, the inhibition and self-restraint. The second thing that happens right after that, we start to develop self-awareness and self-monitoring. This is how a baby knows, yo, I'm hungry. Hello, like, yo, my diaper, like, come on, right? So these processes are actually executive function processes. They're sorting through the different things that they're feeling. So sorting, processing, being able to recognize those things. So self-awareness and self-monitoring, those are first. Okay. Then on top of that, we start to build working memory processes. So there's nonverbal working memory, and that covers a bunch of things. This talks about visualizing or being able to imagine things. That's also how we make plans. We imagine the plan actually happening. So that's actually a planning process, right? Recall, being able to recall things that have already happened. That's sort of, if you think of it as like backwards planning, it's like coming back, looking backwards. And then hindsight and foresight. So that's being able to say, that's a bad idea, and then not do it. Or like, that is so good for me, I should do that. These are executive function processes, all fronty brainy. And so hindsight and foresight are huge. Future forecasting, that sort of thing. And then there's verbal working memory, which is the mind's voice. This is something called metacognition, or I like to call it your brain boss. This is the conductor. This is the brain boss. This is the head coach that's telling everybody else, this is what we're doing. Okay. That comes a lot later in the process and has to build off those other executive functions in order for it to develop. And it's a really challenging process for a lot of people, let alone people who might have a delay in that area of processing and development. So this is your mind's voice. This is what you say to yourself. This is what you hear when you talk to yourself. And for a lot of people, when that's not developed or that's not really addressed, what can happen is we can do something where we just listen to everyone else instead. So when we don't have our metacognitive brain coach, when we don't have that brain coach developed, what happens is instead of being able to talk to ourselves, we listen to others. And that can be a really big challenge. This is a sticking point for ADHDers because as someone who struggles and constantly feels behind and notices that they're behind, they came up with this number, in fact checked it pretty good for accuracy. It's like 20,000 more negative messages are received by a person with ADHD than a normal person. I say that and tears want to squirt out of my eyes like a Nerf gun. It just hurts my heart, right? Like it's not hard enough just growing up. Then we have these negative messages. So imagine having that underdeveloped or behind and then also receiving negative on top of it. This is why ADHD can be such a struggle, is because there's so much shame. There's so much disappointment. There's so much embarrassment. And that's where a lot of that then emotional and mood issues, mental health comes into play. And they can really toggle together, and it's really common for those to co-occur. So anyway, so we've got our inhibition and self-restraint, our self-awareness and self-monitoring. Those are 1 and 2. Working memory categories are nonverbal working memory and then verbal working memory. And then we get to emotional self-regulation. Well, shoot, could have used that a little earlier, right?
The brain is unbelievable. It's
Unbelievable. It's unreal.
nice to hear you talk about this diagnosis, this label that has been put out there, and really take a deep dive into all these different processes, because I don't feel like there's many people out there that understand the complexity that goes through, like you talked about with the dopamine, the executive function, the self-regulation. It's so important. Now, I don't want to brag to everybody, but I got to get interviewed by Val a few weeks ago. Val, can you talk a little bit about what it is that we did? Like what's something that happens when someone is working with you?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great segue. And just to wrap up the executive function, the last 2 executive functions that ever get developed in us are self-motivation and planning and problem solving. Planning and problem solving. So those are the very, very, very last things. So just, I hope everyone just leaves this podcast knowing, oh, wow, like it's okay to struggle with things, ADHD or not. Like these are challenging processes. Does that blow your mind when you hear that?
It really does. Yes.
It's awesome. Could you actually talk a little bit about emotional self-regulation and the other 2, the last 2?
Yes. So this will come into play when, so part of what I do in my work is I do a character strengths assessment. That's why I said, inner strengths and outer strengths are very tightly related. I'm huge into, that's like that could be like a 4-part podcast that I would talk any day about the intersection of inner and outer well-being. Like your mind is your brain and your brain is your body. They are not separate. And so anything I'm talking about that's happening with the brain, there's a body component too. And there's a body way of interacting with that, a physical way. So when it comes to self-regulation and problem solving, self-regulation it's sort of the science word for self-discipline. And that's why self-discipline can become a really challenging sort of sticking point for people, ADHD or not, that can become such a loaded word, I think, for a lot of people. There's two really loaded words that can really trigger self-regulation or a lack of self-regulation. It is discipline and it is consistency. And I feel like those are two words that are like the fitness like words of all things, right? It's like discipline and consistency. It's like discipline, consistency, intensity, you know, all those little aspects and things like that. I really want to encourage a reframe around this, because if you're a person with ADHD and you're trying to implement a fitness regimen or a nutrition regimen or anything like that, if you're hung up on language, this is where it can be a showstopper. This is where the breakdown happens. We either don't start, or we have a hard time keeping going, or we just throw it all out because of the black and white thinking that a lot of people can have, that is extremely specific to also to ADHD. Like that's always going to be that black and white thinking. So knowing that self-regulation and self-discipline are kind of interchangeable, when someone struggles with self-regulation, I need people to know, especially in this space, getting into your body is one of the most important things that you can possibly do when you experience dysregulation. Being in your body. Because when you are experiencing self-dysregulation or mental dysregulation, emotional dysregulation, that's actually a nervous system. That's a system dysregulation. That's not an emotional outburst, right? When we try to say it's a behavior, like, oh, these ADHD behaviors having an emotional outburst, that's dysregulation. That is a non-regulated system. And in order to help bring that regulation back, we actually, a really important and helpful approach can be a body approach. It can be getting into your body. That's interoception, starting any type of, we call it nurturing movement, right? This is stretching. This is moving your limb. Mobility in general is such a beautiful and important tool for self-regulation. One of the first things I teach my clients is a self-regulation practice that has to do with breathing and physically placing your hand on your belly and your chest, and it's called the pause, and you're breathing through this. And I'll often encourage my clients too to change your position. If you're sitting up, lay flat. If you're laying down, stand up. If you can orient to a wall and stretch your hands straight up the wall so that you can be in your body and in your brain. Like you're in your brain. When you're dysregulated, you're like, bah, right? We don't have to get in there. We got to sort of get the whole thing sort of back online. Because when we experience dysregulation, this is that brain model. I'm going to show you what happens. This is your amygdala. This is in the middle of the brain, and it's what helps fight or flight. It's going to make you run from the bear or fight the bear or whatever it is. But when you are experiencing dysregulation with this amygdala and it starts wiggling a little, like under here, this is what happens. Your whole executive function, that front brain, goes offline. It goes offline. We're not in our front brain when we're in our emotional brain. So what happens is we lose access to our executive functions. When we're emotionally dysregulated, we're having that emotional fight or flight response. Those processes, they're offline. And now we're just left with all of this. And guess what? Do you think you can try to get your brain to walk yourself out of that? No. But what do you still have? Your body. You still have your body. And so even just gentle nurturing movements to help bring you sort of back into your space and orient to where you are and what you're doing is one of the most helpful strategies that someone can be doing. So imagine now having a practice of nurturing movements, AKA exercise, like the best prescription that any ADHD professional in the medical field or elsewhere, the actual prescription that they would write for you based on research and science and data is exercise. It's exercise.
That's basically one of the first that we've ever heard of a podcast come on to say that that is something that's actually been prescribed, has been exercised?
Oh, it should be the first. It should be the first one. It should be the very first one. Now, caveat, some people have limitations. Some people have physical issues where they're not able to be prescribed a regimen. And you guys address that on your podcast. So I know your audience knows. I'm not just like, yeah, oh, you have ADHD, exercise and it'll go away. It's not a cure.
It's a tool.
Yes.
And one of the most coolest things about strategies that work for ADHDers, because our executive functions, which I just talked about, are a little more challenging to access, they're a little tougher to keep online, they require a lot of dopamine from us and drain a lot of dopamine, while we're doing it, and it's hard to access dopamine for them. So one of the best things that you can be doing is exercising. Like, I have an entire book here. Like, this book, Spark, if no one has read this book before, it's absolutely fascinating. It's the revolutionary not new, science of exercise in the brain. Your mind is your brain and your brain is your body. Movement and fitness absolutely has an impact for ADHD. And if I were a prescriber, that is the first thing that I would prescribe over anything else. And then diving in to dopaminergic, dopamine building practices, which is what you and I did, Beth. We did that strengths assessment. And that really gave us a window into what are your dopamine drivers and what are your dopamine drainers. And all of those things combined, you just build this tool belt of ways that you can be working with your brain instead of against it. And the body is one of the best tools for doing that. So I'm so happy I have a space where I can say that for people who are like,
yes, I agree. I totally agree.
Is there something to working out first thing in the morning then?
That is a great question. So for ADHDers, it's common, it's not diagnostic, but it's common to have something called delayed sleep phase syndrome. And that actually causes a sort of lag in the day where it's almost like moving the day by 2 to 3 hours. That can be very common in ADHDers. So they may find it actually extremely difficult to get their bodies going first thing in the morning, unless it's a time that they're used to waking up with and feeling good about. Contradictory, because it's ADHD, so of course it's a paradox. Contradictory. We know that working out is going to buy us, especially at certain levels and things, which I'll let you guys sort of talk more about, but working out to a high enough level for about even just 10 minutes or 20 minutes, that is going to create a higher dopamine level in everybody's brain for, I believe it's up to like 2.5 hours or something, but for at least an hour and a half to 2 hours, you're going to have the highest dopamine you're going to have. So if you can front load that into your day and say you're a person who has 9 a.m. meetings, all that sort of stuff, it's really advantageous for you to be working out in the morning if your body has access and availability to the dopamine that you need. It's something they're super interested in because ADHD brains are interest-based, not importance-based. That's like how we drive. But, it's funny as we talk about these things, the things that work for all, normies, I call y'all normies.
I don't know if I'm a normie, Val.
Yeah,
really
no.
No. Maybe not. Those people, all those things that work for normies don't always work for neurodiverse people, right? Neurotypical things don't all work for all neurodiverse people. However, neurodiverse approaches tend to work for all neurotypical people because they're typically broken down into really bite-sized steps, a really interesting approach. Like, for example, an ADHD brain is interest wired. It's very interest-based. Well, guess what? Neurotypical people, they're going to do better in things that they're interested in, right? So it makes sense, right, to have certain novelty and just certain approaches. So that's why I like sharing, this is what works for ADHDers, this is what can work, because it tends to work also for other people. So a morning workout, maybe throw a dart. That's what we do in coaching. We throw a dart and we don't just throw it once, we throw it again, because if you've
Personalized.
experienced a lot like if you've experienced a lot of defeat in your life, it means you're going into things expecting defeat. And so when you're defeated, you just proved yourself right, and then you just move on. And that tends to be a strategy for a lot of ADHDers, and that can be really, that's sad. That's really hard. So throw the dart more than once is my rule. Throw the dart and throw it more than once, just to see if it matters in the day. But I really encourage people, the sooner you do get that workout in, the sooner you do get the benefits of that workout for your brain. So I'm a huge fan. It doesn't necessarily work for everybody, but I think having that flexibility, that cognitive flexibility, I think is really important. Like, well, what are our options? Let's explore them all. But there isn't one time of day that works best for an ADHDer. It's the time of day that they're most interested in working out. That's what's going to work.
That makes sense.
Can you unpack the
Yeah.
interest versus importance when it comes to school and education and learning?
Oh yeah. Tell me more. Tell me about that question, Brian. Tell me more.
I find it very, I've said that before, where I've had a hard time in school because some things I just wasn't interested in, and I would hyper focus on certain subjects hyper focus on subjects I was interested in, like annoyingly talk to people about them all the time. You can ask Beth.
This is what we do every day.
Yeah.
I think hyper focus is the language of productivity, right? We associate hyper focus with productivity and interest and all of that. And that is a pretty significant point for ADHDers and what sort of delineates. So if I ask someone, tell me your values. What are your values? What are you interested in? Oh, that they shoot off the F's. It's faith, family, fun, and food, and blah blah. It's just like such a canned response. I'm like, honey, those are not values. Those are ways that you spend your time, but those aren't values, and they're not interests. Those are just ways you spend your time. The priorities, right? Your interests and your values are different. Some of them might be a little the same, but values and interests and strengths are very different from importance and priorities. And so typically, like, a neurotypical person is going to have a little easier time orienting toward what's important, what's urgent. Why? Because it's time sensitive, right? Something becomes important when there's a time attached to it or a deadline or whatever. And so they can orient towards time. ADHD brains, executive function challenges, you have difficulty with time processing. That's nonverbal working memory. And so I can't orient my day to what's important or urgent because there's only now and not now. And if it's not now, I don't know what to do with that. Like, that just goes over there. So we're constant in this now, and now is what's interesting, right? Now, right now is what's interesting. But if we're not in a space, we have to make things interesting to our brains, and neurotypical people benefit from this too. Make something interesting to your brain and you will have a higher engagement. It will yield more dopamine return. And so creating novelty around things, whether it's a fitness program or with nutrition or whatever, there has to be something interesting to you. And if you can't find it, create it. Use your character strengths, like with a character strengths assessment, like I did with Beth. Use the things that you naturally gravitate to. People are like, I don't know how to engage in fitness. And I'm like, how did you play when you were a kid? How did you play? Right? Like, what did you enjoy doing before someone told you how you had to? That's really important. And then if you can't engage in those ways, well, engage with people who remind you of the people you used to do that with. And that'll bring an interest to it for you, right? That's why I think group fitness is brilliant. That's why I think community anything is so smart, because we're at least having that collection of people and that connection that can sometimes bring back like memories of ways that we used to do things that worked for us while we're trying to figure out new things that work for us now. So, I tangented there. That's like
So much good
I
information.
hope I answered your question. Yeah, it's super common for interests to really lead whether or not we have success in something, especially in school. And where there isn't interest, we either have to accept that or infuse interest into it some way, somehow, no matter what it takes. And that will help drive engagement for anything.
Is that something that like coaching services helps with?
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the very first things I do with people, and I think I told Beth this, I did a character strengths assessment, which is basically your dopamine drivers and drainers. Where does your literal energy come from? Not like woo energy. Nothing wrong with woo energy, but that's just not my scope. Just like actual physical energy. And then what we do with that information is we help build a language and a framework and some habits around what your signature strengths are. And then those things that are more difficult, that require more self-regulation, self-discipline, and perseverance and things like that, we can help do strengths pairing so that you can actually become interested in the things that are more challenging to you or things that you're struggling with. So I actually am doing the character strengths assessment. I have it on my website as like a one-off. If someone's like, I don't know if I have ADHD, or I don't know if I want coaching, and they just want a character strengths assessment because you're already in a space of working in your strengths, your physical strength, this might be a great complement to that. And then it could help give you insights into what sort of ways you can be approaching your fitness, your nutrition, your wellness in a way that is actually going to be successful for you, right? Playing in your strength, building your strength is that strengths-based approach. And that's how I wish everyone would just have a mentality of life, is to just seek a strengths-based approach to all things. Because when we're strong in our bodies and we're strong in our minds, we can show up strong in the spaces and things that we're trying to get done. So I love doing strength assessments for people. I have it as a one-off. I reduced the price for these next couple weeks so that people just have really accessible option to it, and it's right on my website. So any of these listeners, if you just want a strengths assessment, and then I also do free consultations, you guys. Like, I'm just trying to help people. Like, what do you need? Let's talk about ADHD. Like, I don't know if I should talk about ADHD. I'm like, well, let's do it anyway. It's what we got, right?
Absolutely.
It's not happening. There's no spaces for this unless we invite people into it. So free consultations and the character strengths assessment available to everybody for sure in your following, in your group, and always. And anything that I can do to help continue the conversation or help people have next steps. Maybe they have ADHD, maybe they don't, maybe they have executive function challenges, maybe they don't, whatever it is. I just want to be available and helpful in that beginning process. And I can help refer them out to who might be a better scope than me if ADHD coaching isn't what they're looking for, or executive function coaching isn't what they're looking for. But I just think
we actually we had a viewer, somebody that's on, Patty. She had you just said this right now, but she asked, she said it's been a great podcast, and she would like to know how you approach this with kids of all ages. But I think I'm going to have Patty reach out to you privately for that question, unless that's something you want to address to her directly while she's viewing.
I typically talk to people, especially when it comes to kids. I typically do parent coaching anyway. And I think ADHD is too nuanced to give a blanket recommendation for what someone may need or how to intervene. This was a really general conversation. I wanted to keep it that way because I think it's just really specific when it comes to different people. So, and that's why I do those for free, those 20-minute consults. We can start a conversation. You can tell me more about that question and where it comes from and how to address it with their unique child or someone like that. So just book a free consult and we can talk about those things. And you're not obligated to like do coaching or whatever. It's just to start a conversation.
And you do work with all ages as well.
Yeah, so I typically do adult coaching and parent coaching because when it comes to child coaching, the evidence-based research says that parent coaching is actually the most effective. So because I'm an ADHD coach and that's the science that's been presented to me, that's sort of where I stay. I can refer someone to like another, like an executive function coach who might work with children, that sort of thing. But no matter what, there's no avoiding the data that says the best support for a child with ADHD is actually for the parent of the child with ADHD. So that's where I stay in play, but I can always help try to guide if someone's like, no, I want direct help for my child. I can help point you in that direction for sure. So.
And does ADHD affect men differently than women, if at all, if it does at all?
Yeah, it can. There's certain common traits that are going to be kind of across the board because of that neurodevelopmental delay. You're going to see executive dysfunction challenges, short-term memory issues, organizing, and all of that to say, if someone has a hyper focus in one of those things, though, like say someone is a hyper focus in organizing, well, then they're not going to have a deficit in it because they're super high interest. That's where it gets messy, right? So that's where it can present really differently. I guess it's more of like in women, particularly because of our hormone experience through life being so dynamic, you're going to see a little bit of a different presentation in women, and you're actually going to see more of an inconsistency where there's going to be weeks of the month where like our executive function is so low and so challenging. And that's where that might differ from men, where they're a little bit more of a steady sort of experience on a hormonal level and a dopamine level. Just because the responsibilities and executive function demands are very different for men and women, that's the difference you're going to see. But the ADHD itself in the brain isn't what's actually different. It's just the demands that are different that are placed on us. So that's where it might show up differently. But it's more about how it shows up from person to person than anything else. I work with men, I work with women. I have clients in their 50s and 60s, and I have clients who are 16. So that's like the lowest I've ever worked with someone, and I typically don't, but it's a pretty wide ranging thing. And the work that I do with each person is totally different, just depending on their needs and what their strengths and their signature strengths. So that was a great question.
And can you give us any general coping mechanisms or strategies that you can recommend for managing ADHD symptoms like in adults?
Yeah, I would say from a coach's perspective on a podcast with listeners who are accessibly aware of fitness and open to it, I would say that exercise being your number one, like that is the number one priority. And that is something you should be interested in. The benefits of exercise are pretty interesting. And like, it's like no question, right? I brought my friend's paper with me because he's like just brilliant. He's actually a social worker and a certified personal trainer. He's not taking class. Don't worry. I'm not recommending no one to him. We're going to Sperduti Fitness. Sorry about that. I knew him before you, or I'd be with you, you get it, and I'll still be with you, so you get it. Anyway, I just want like really simple science. Like myokines play a crucial role in enhancing brain plasticity. There's the generation of new brain cells, the establishment of connections between them. It enhances the brain's adaptability to resilience. Like I don't have anything else that hits on all of the things other than what produces in your body and brain as a result of exercise. I really think that is like the best, most possible, accessible thing that we can do. Other than that, learning self-regulation strategies, like somatic regulation strategies, I really encourage people to do that with a coach or someone that can walk them through. So you know really how to do those in a healthy way, you know, assuming there's no breathing limitations or heart issues or anything like that. But the exercise and self-regulation strategies that will help bring that back online so that you can then use more of your front brain and get things sort of back in order. But for ADHD, the science says medication, exercise, and coaching. I'm medication neutral. I'm not a medical professional, so it's not in my interest to recommend it or not recommend it. But those are the three things that they have said are absolutely database proven to help manage ADHD symptoms: exercise, medication, and coaching, ADHD specific coaching. So those would be my recommendations. Yeah.
And then let's see, there's one question here we had. Are there any lifestyle modifications or habits that you can that can complement treatment for ADHD? Any habits people can change or incorporate?
I wish I could be like, oh, this one thing is so good. Like everyone is so different with how their ADHD is affecting them in their everyday life. So in speaking to habits, I will say that habit stacking is an incredibly helpful way of implementing things that you're trying to change in your life. That's where you take anything that you are already doing automatically, in examples like brushing your teeth or your morning coffee or your daily exercise or whatever, and either immediately before it and or immediately after that, tag on the thing that you're trying to also do. So maybe it's that you're trying to track your spending better, or you're trying to drink more water, or you're trying, like, it could be any type of habit. I mean, everyone's so different what they're trying to get done in their day and their life. But if you take something you're already doing and stack something before or after, you just have such more of a likelihood to be successful with it because it's attached to something and it has a relationship with something that's like a non-negotiable. So
You were saying
that
so
makes
many
sense.
words that I love.
Yeah.
Habit stacking,
Non-negotiable.
self-regulate. Like I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, Val, and we're like
Yeah.
spirit animals.
I was
I'm so
hoping
glad that you came on our super
secret,
friends.
like I know, secret. I was hoping that I would come on here and not say wildly weird things that people weren't familiar with. That's not my hope. I'm not trying to be interesting, honestly. I'm trying to be reinforcing and encouraging, because the reality is we need 7 to 10 repetitions of something before we maybe remember it. And if we got ADHD, maybe double that. Okay.
So what you're saying is Brian and I should be continuously talking about consistency,
Yeah,
self-regulation,
absolutely.
discipline, which we
Absolutely.
do all the time. It is something we say over and over and over.
Yes, it's undeniable. Like it's truly undeniable, the benefits of what you guys are doing and the work that you're doing and what you're helping people do. And what I wanted to make sure I come on here and say, no matter what, is that outsourcing executive functions or externalizing executive functions, meaning having a buddy or a mentor or a coach or a leader, that is outsourcing executive functions, letting someone else do the planning, the problem solving, the organizing, the showing up, the timing, the setup, that's outsourcing executive function. And that's one of the number one strategies that I try to teach my clients. That's what you guys do. That's exactly what you're doing for people.
And you almost answered a little bit with this last question that I have for you. So what advice would you give to someone who has recently been diagnosed with ADHD and is feeling overwhelmed and uncertain possibly about their future?
That is a really great question. So what would I tell someone who is recently diagnosed and they're in the thick of unsureness, not knowing what to do and all of that? I would tell them to remove TikTok from your phone.
Wow. Yeah.
Do not go online and try to identify with anecdotal individual experiences of people with ADHD. It's nuanced, it's over personalized. It will either make you feel like you're so ADHD that you can't even think of anything else and you'll hyper focus on it, or it will misguide you and present misinformation to you. I highly, highly recommend connect with a medical professional or who like a therapist or anyone who falls into those higher ranking categories of certification for mental health support. Absolutely, have a great therapist. And after that, I say get a coach, because those are the people who are ADHD specialized. There's not, like, unless you find a therapist or a professional who has all the letters of ADHD specialized credentials, which there's like one way to do that and nobody ever does it. So ADHD coaches are the specialists. I think it's really helpful to connect to a coach in any capacity so that they can at least give you a starting point if you're wherever you are local, if you're in Buffalo, if you're farther away, like there's a whole network of certified coaches who know and understand ADHD and can help guide you in your space wherever you live for what to do next. But don't fall into the information overload of ADHD, because it's a jungle out there and it's not safe. I'll tell you right now.
Don't get your
It's so
information from online
Right.
platform.
oh my gosh, no. Like,
Find the
yes, certain things
professionals.
can be helpful, it's cute, and it's like, oh yeah, me too. But also, like, you gotta find out you. Figure out your signature strengths. What is the language of your brain when it's talking to you? Learn about executive functions and how they're impacting your life, and then find professionals who are great in their field, like y'all, and let some outsourcing of executive functions start happening in your basic needs. Physical is number one. This is the body you get for now and for the rest of your life. This is it. This is the one. So heck, like, get a helper, get a buddy, get a coach, get someone helping you out with this, right? And the same goes with nutrition, a registered dietitian. Like, absolutely, like, outsource your executive functions. Stop trying to superhero your own life. Like, there's so many people who are incredible at what they do. We have to let other people be great in their spaces and then come alongside us to be great in our spaces. And that's all of our secrets, right? If we were just like that's our secret to success. It's like, well, I was willing to humble myself and get help. So that would be my loaded advice. Not to
Wow,
That's
this
it.
is so much great information. Val, can you give people your social media handles, websites, and we're also going to attach everything as well so they can get a hold of you and set up a consultation or the assessment.
Yeah, that sounds great. So my Instagram is simply SIMPLY, Val, VAL, Mac, MACK, simply Val Mac. That's my Instagram. I don't post on it a lot intentionally because Instagram can be very distracting for me, but I have just enough on there where you know where to find me, and you'll catch me in stories. I'm always posting in my stories. That's just an easier space for me to show up in. So that's my Instagram, and my links are there if you need to. My website is ADHDsimply.com. Well, that's it. So that's where you can find the link. You can apply for a free consult. If you don't see a date that works for you, just message me on Instagram. I will create one for you. I just try to really work with people. Like, if you're listening to this and you have like an inkling, like, I feel like I want to connect with her, but I don't know about what. I don't know if I have ADHD. If something I said resonated and you feel like you need to continue the conversation, book a free consult. It means that there's something more to do with this, and I can help move you in whatever direction you're supposed to go, even if it isn't to work with me. I just want to help people. So just connect with me there. That's the easiest way to do that. Then we go from there.
And we would love to have you on again to go a little deeper into some of the topics we
Yes.
talk. Absolutely. Oh, I have notes. I have notes.
I saw Brian
here.
writing, like,
Yeah.
we've got 3 podcasts to go.
Yes. Before we wrap
you've been
everything up,
great.
and we're so appreciative of you coming on and talking about ADHD, Coach Beth has a few questions for you.
These are my favorites. These are the questions that make you a real person, just like the rest of us, right? Even though you're a fantastic
Makes you a
coach,
normie.
we love it. Yeah, see, you're a normie. So these are the good, fun questions. Val, we're going to ask you this one first. What are your top 3 restaurants in the Buffalo area?
Okay, so my top 3. I love Alchemy because I'm a secret bartender there.
Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, and they do pop-ups there for food. So they're not like a restaurant, but they're sort of, and they just do great events there, and you can host things there. So I would say Alchemy's I love it. Across the street from that is the Grange, and I'm always there too. So you'll find me at one or two.
Well, I'm going to see you a lot this summer.
We'll make work trips.
Work meetings, Brian. Work meetings. and Sweet Pea Bakery, because I'm gluten-free and I have allergies. It's super like helpful with those kind of things. So that's where I'm going. And if I forgot anyone that I love, super sorry. I eat a little.
She was only
go
allowed to
anywhere.
pick 3 today, so the next time she'll pick 3 different.
Yeah, I like those 3.
So if you had a long day and you're like, you know what, I'm just eating something I really want, what is your go-to cheat meal?
Oh, my go-to sheet. So I call them a choice meal. That's my reframe.
I love it.
I like it.
Choice. I'm sincerely choosing this with all my heart. That's what I call it, a choice meal. My favorite little pleasure is to go to Wegmans and get oh, I don't want to tell people because then they'll do it. Okay, I get sushi.
I'm the same way, Val. I'm like, I don't know if I want to get away with my
I
secret.
can't tell you, you'll take it. I get sushi. I will
Love it.
not tell you what kind because it's hardly ever there already. Y'all are stealing it. So I get sushi and a kombucha and these little healthy, but they're called, what an awful name. They're called healthy vegan bites. I'm not vegan. They're little oatmeal balls of tasty goodness. And I just sit in my car. I don't even leave the parking lot and I just eat them.
I do the same thing.
I love it.
I'm not lying. I said to somebody the other day at the gym, I go, I'm going to get a family pack of sushi and sitting in Wegmans parking lot by myself. And they go, why? I'm like, you got kids? They go, no. I go, hey, don't worry about it.
Then don't ask. Then don't ask.
We call that, it's one word. It's called karsushi. And it is a practice. Practice for sushi.
Ryan's practicing his sushi. And I love it. That's going to stick
awesome.
around. All right. This one's another good one. This is my favorite. When you are looking for that indulgent treat, are you going for something sweet or salty?
Oh man. I'm a sweet. Yeah. Like a Carmelita from Sweet Pea Bakery. And I'm just take me away. Like I'm good. Like I'm set. If I'm done, if life served its time, like I want to go eating a Carmelita.
Now I'm going to have to get one. Now I'm going to have to tell you guys what it's all about.
If I'm lucky. Oh man. Questions. I'm not a robot.
This is one of our favorite ones too. What show are you currently watching right now?
The show I'm currently watching right now.
Or a show you just finished up?
Yeah.
Well, I watch New Girl on repeat. I can't help it. New Girl and Friends is just always like playing.
It's your background noise.
Yeah. Otherwise, I love watching stand-up comedy because humor is like one of my highest signature strengths. I'm super funny. No, I'm kidding. That's not. It doesn't mean you're funny. To clarify, if you have funny humor, it's not necessarily funny. It means you appreciate humor, and I really do. So I've been watching stand-up comedians, and I really enjoy that. So that's my little pleasure watch.
What stand-up comedians are you watching?
I love Taylor Tomlinson. Like, talk about a riot. She's a hoot. But I'll just watch anybody and everybody. Like, I was groomed very young. I watched the original Kings of Comedy when I was way too young to watch that.
Yeah, that's a throwback.
Yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah.
You just throw back. Like, my hair's gray, right? Like, I'm an elder millennial here. So original black to me. And now I'm like, give me all the terrible humor that I don't understand. It goes over my head because I still feel too young. Anyway,
Whenever I'm super stressed, I'll just watch Impractical Jokers for hours.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's a good one.
It just mellows me out for some reason. It makes me laugh, and I can just sit by myself for hours.
That's self-regulation, buddy.
Yeah.
That's self-regulation. Familiar, sitting back. Yeah, that's like Netflix.
All right, Val. Yeah, right.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
We're gonna rename that.
Yeah.
All right. So the last question that we have for you then, Val, at the end of the day, when you're done, what are you doing to help yourself de-stress?
Oh, that's a great question. I do love doing mild stretches, like really mild stretches in the evening. I might just do them in my bed even. Like I don't need a setup. I can just move. I call it nurturing movement, just things that feel good for my body. I love to do that. And then I love to drink tea in the evening, and then I'll usually throw on a little something. I used to be very anti-TV, like anti-Netflix, like, oh, watching other people live their dreams when you could be living yours. I'm like, get off it. Like, I can watch a show for 20 minutes. Like, what the heck, right?
Absolutely.
I was that.
Absolutely.
Oh, like, I
We
get
all
it.
go through
It's true.
phases. We know, we all do.
Totally true. We don't want to sit around watching people live their dreams while we just eat Cheez-Its, right? Like, that's not great. But it does help me unwind a little as an ADHDer, spending a lot of time and trying to be in my front brain and getting it working. I need to just unwind and kind of watch something that doesn't affect me in any way. And it disconnects me from all the things that are happening in life. So I'd love to say I read novels, but I don't. I watch, watch crash comedy.
Yeah.
My it's fine.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Yeah.
That is so awesome. And this was such a great podcast today. So much great information. And again, we appreciate you coming on, and we would absolutely love to have you on again. I mean, that would just be awesome to dive deeper, and also,
That's awesome.
yeah, to put it out in advance for people too, to ask questions that we can kind of go over with you too, would be fantastic. So
Absolutely. I think it's awesome what you guys are doing. I'll try to bring some more facts around mental health and exercise and things like that. I'll try to bring that for you guys next time too.
Together.
yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I'm super pumped about the next one. This one was a blast, and it's just a lot to go. I have a lot of notes, so we have a lot to go over next time we chat. but Val, thank you so much for joining us today. So for myself, Coach Beth, and our guest Val, we will catch you guys next podcast.
Bye.
Sounds great. Take care.